My name is Walter Hayes, and I'm 86 years old. I live in rural Kentucky, in a small town called Harlan, in a house that I built with my own two hands back in 1973. This house sits on 15 acres of land overlooking the mountains, and it's the only place I've ever truly felt at peace. If you're watching this right now, I want you to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know if you're somewhere in America, or if you've somehow found this story from across the world. Your comment means more to me than you could possibly know. I have two sons. My oldest is David, who lives with me in this house, and his wife is named Catherine. My younger son is Michael, who moved to Nashville years ago to pursue music. My pride and joy is my granddaughter Sarah, who is David's daughter. Sarah is 25 years old, studying to become a veterinarian, and she has the kind of heart that makes you believe in the goodness of humanity. My wife Margaret passed away 14 years ago from cancer, and since then this house has been the place where I keep her memory alive. I spent 42 years working as a coal miner in these Kentucky hills. I worked hard, saved my money, and when I retired, I had just enough to own this land outright and maintain this house that my own hands helped build. I never made a lot of money, but I was never ashamed of that. I worked with integrity, paid my taxes, raised my children to respect hard work and honesty. This land represents everything I believe in. It's not just property, it's my legacy. It's the place where my family gathers. It's sacred ground to me. Everything in my life has always been straightforward. Work hard, be honest, take care of your family, and the rest will follow. I believed that if you lived right, treated people with respect, and taught your children the same values, then you'd leave behind something that mattered. I truly believe that. But what happens when the people closest to you decide that those values don't matter anymore? What happens when you discover that the person you've trusted with your home, your name, your reputation, is planning to steal it from you while you're still breathing? If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments right now, because this is the decision that changed my entire life. 3 months ago, on a cold November evening in Kentucky, something happened that shattered the world as I knew it. I was sitting in my workshop, a small building I built behind the main house where I like to work on fixing old tools and wooden furniture. The workshop is my sanctuary, filled with the smell of sawdust and old varnish. Around 8 o'clock at night, I came back to the house because the temperature was dropping, and I wanted to get some coffee. As I was walking toward the kitchen, I heard voices coming from the living room. David and Catherine were having a conversation, and they weren't speaking in their normal tone. It was hushed, calculated, the kind of voice people use when they don't want to be heard. I stopped at the doorway, unseen by them, and I listened. What I heard in the next 5 minutes would undo everything I thought I knew about my son. David was explaining to Catherine a plan so detailed, so calculated, that I couldn't believe he'd been thinking about this for months. He said, "Dad's health is going to decline. Maybe he's got 5 years left, maybe 10. But when he dies, if the deed stays in his name, everything goes through probate, and the property gets divided. Sarah gets a portion, Michael gets a portion, and we'd have to negotiate with them. That's not acceptable." Catherine asked what he was proposing. David's response made my blood run cold. He said he had already spoken to a lawyer about having me declared mentally incompetent, about obtaining power of attorney fraudulently, and about transferring the deed to his name by falsifying my signature and having me declared senile. The plan went deeper than just the house. David had also decided that Sarah, my granddaughter, shouldn't inherit anything. He claimed that since she wasn't his biological daughter, but adopted into the family, she had no legal claim. This was a lie. Sarah is his biological daughter. She was born to him and Margaret's youngest sister, who couldn't raise her, so we raised her as our own. But David's version of the story made it convenient for him to exclude her entirely. He wanted to sell the land, pocket the money, and give Catherine a portion while keeping the rest for himself. Michael was barely mentioned, as if he'd already written him off. I stood there in the darkness of the hallway, listening to my son explain how he would commit fraud to steal from his aging father. I felt something break inside me. Not just the shock of betrayal, but the deeper realization that everything I thought I had taught him meant nothing. All the lessons about honesty, about hard work, about family loyalty, they had somehow turned to dust in David's mind. I went back to my workshop and sat there until dawn, not moving, barely breathing, just staring at the darkness. For the next week I continued as normal. I had breakfast with David and Catherine every morning. I worked in the shop. I ate dinner with them. But I was living a lie now too, which made me feel sick. I was pretending not to know what I knew, pretending to trust people I could no longer trust. Every time Catherine smiled at me while preparing my meal, I wondered if it was genuine, or if she was already mentally dividing my possessions. Every time David asked me how I was feeling, I wondered if he was assessing whether I seemed senile enough to manipulate. The house, which had always been my refuge, became my prison. I looked at the walls and thought about how I had mortared every brick with my own hands. I looked at the wooden beams and remembered cutting the timber myself. I looked at the land from the back porch and remembered every tree I had planted, every fence I had built. And I felt that all of it was being stolen from me while I sat helpless and watched. But worse than that, I felt that my life's work, my legacy, the proof that I had lived with purpose was being erased by my own son. I made a decision. I couldn't wait. I couldn't allow David to execute his plan while I was still alive to see it happen. I called Sarah without telling David or Catherine, and I asked her to come to the house on Saturday. I told her it was urgent, that it couldn't wait. Sarah arrived that morning, and when I saw her face, I saw Margaret in her eyes. Sarah has always been the most emotionally intelligent person in my family, the one who understands people, the one who listens. I took her to my workshop and I told her everything. I told Sarah exactly what I had heard. I didn't soften it. I didn't try to make David seem less guilty. I told her that her father and stepmother were planning to commit fraud, that they were plotting to steal the land, and that they were intentionally planning to exclude her from any inheritance. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, tears were streaming down her face. She said, "Grandpa, you need to talk to a lawyer immediately. This is serious. This is a crime." I knew she was right, but I needed to know if Sarah thought I was overreacting, if I was being paranoid. She assured me I wasn't. She said she had always felt uncomfortable around Catherine, that something had never sat right with her, and now she understood why. That Monday, Sarah and I met with an attorney named James Sterling, who specializes in elder law and estate planning. James is a sharp man, maybe 50 years old, and when I told him what David and Catherine had planned, his expression didn't change, which somehow made it more serious. He said, "Mr. Hayes, what you're describing is elder fraud. It's a felony. The falsification of documents, the false declaration of incompetence, the fraud of power of attorney, these are serious crimes." He recommended a multi-part strategy. First, I needed to undergo a complete cognitive evaluation to prove that I was mentally competent. Second, I needed to create a new will and trust that would protect my assets and clearly state my wishes. Third, and most importantly, I needed to consider transferring the property to Sarah immediately as a gift during my lifetime, which would prevent anyone from falsifying documents to steal it after my death. I agreed. I underwent extensive cognitive testing with a neurologist and a psychiatrist. The results were perfect. My memory was sharp. My reasoning was clear. My judgment was sound. In fact, the psychiatrist told me that my mental clarity was exceptional for a man my age. It was gratifying, in a strange way, because it made clear that David's plan was not just unethical, it was also completely baseless. I wasn't showing any signs of decline. I was fully capable of making my own decisions. With James's help, I drafted a new will that clearly divided my property. The house and the 15 acres would go to Sarah as a gift during my lifetime. My other assets would be divided equally between David and Michael. I documented the reasoning for these decisions in writing, along with my cognitive evaluation, so there would be no question about my mental state or my intentions. Then came the hardest part. I had to sign the documents that would transfer my beloved land to Sarah. The day of the transfer, Sarah, James, and I went to the county clerk's office in Harlan. I signed the deed with my own hand, and the land that I had built my life on, the land that represented everything I had worked for, officially passed to Sarah's name. When we walked out of that building, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I could breathe again. The threat was neutralized. The conspiracy couldn't prosper because there was nothing left to steal. That evening, I made a decision. I was going to tell David myself. I was going to sit him down and make him understand that I knew everything, that I had been aware of his plan from the very beginning, and that I had acted to protect what was mine and what I loved. I called David into my workshop. He came in suspecting nothing, probably thinking I wanted to discuss repairs or something mundane. I asked him to sit down, and I told him everything. I told David that I had heard his conversation with Catherine. I told him I knew about the plan to have me declared incompetent. I told him about the cognitive evaluation, about the new will, about the transfer of the property to Sarah. I watched his face change in real time. Shock, then anger, then a kind of desperate resignation. "How long have you known?" he asked. I told him I had known for 3 months. "Why didn't you confront me?" he asked. I told him it was because I wanted to make sure I protected myself properly, not just emotionally, but legally, in a way that would stand up to any challenge. "David," I said, "I don't understand how we got here. I raised you better than this. I taught you that honesty and integrity were the foundation of everything. What happened to you? What made you think that stealing from your father was acceptable?"
David didn't have a good answer. He muttered something about financial problems, about feeling like he deserved more, about never having had his own success. But these were excuses, and we both knew it. David moved out of the house 2 weeks later. He said he needed space, but really, I think he was ashamed and afraid. Catherine went with him. They rented a place on the other side of Harlan. I haven't seen them since, though David has called a few times. He alternates between anger and apology, between defending his actions and admitting they were wrong. I don't know if we'll ever repair what was broken. That's something I'm still processing. There's a pain that comes with knowing your child has tried to betray you. It's different from the pain of a stranger's cruelty. It cuts deeper because of the history, because of all the years you invested in that person.
I remember when David was born, holding him in the hospital, thinking about all the things I would teach him, all the ways I would guide him. That hope, that dream, it feels like it died on the day I heard that conversation. Something in my chest closed off, and I don't know if it will ever fully open again. What I do know is that Michael came home from Nashville the week after David left. He spent time with me. We talked about everything that had happened, and he expressed his solidarity. He told me he had always suspected that something wasn't right with David, but he didn't know how to address it. Now at least the truth was in the open. Michael stayed for a month, and during that time he helped me process everything. We walked the property together, and he told me stories about how Dad had taught him to love this land, even from a distance. That meant everything to me. Sarah moved into the main house with me. She kept her own place in the city, but she comes out here every weekend, and she's helping me maintain the property. She's also started working as a veterinarian at a clinic nearby, so she's building her own life while staying connected to her roots. The bond between Sarah and me has deepened immeasurably. She's not just my granddaughter anymore. She's my partner in protecting what we love. The last few months have been some of the most peaceful I've experienced in years. I think about David sometimes. I still love him, which makes everything hurt more. But I don't fear for my future anymore. I don't lie awake at night wondering when the other shoe will drop. Sarah comes home and we sit on the porch and watch the mountains turn purple as the sun sets. And I know that when I'm gone, this land will be in good hands. This land will continue to be a place of peace and integrity. Last month I received a handwritten letter from David. In it he apologized for everything. He said he had been struggling with feelings of inadequacy, that he'd always felt like he was living in my shadow, and that he thought somehow taking control of the property would give him power and independence. It was a letter full of regret, and something that looked like genuine remorse. I haven't responded yet. I'm still deciding whether forgiveness is something I can offer, or whether the hurt is too deep. But the fact that he wrote, that he tried, that counts for something. It doesn't erase what he did, but it's a start. Through all of this, I've learned something fundamental about life and family. Family is not guaranteed loyalty. Family is not automatically trustworthy. Family is something that has to be earned and maintained. You can give everything to your children, and they might still turn against you. That's a hard truth, but it's a truth I've come to accept. What matters is that you don't let that truth make you bitter. You don't let it destroy your capacity to love. You just become more careful, more intentional, more aware. I'm 86 years old. I've worked for 60 plus years. I've raised children and grandchildren. I've built things that will outlast me. And in the end, the most important thing isn't the house or the land, though I love them. It's knowing that the legacy I'm leaving behind, the values I've tried to live by, they'll continue through Sarah and through Michael. That's what matters. That's what will endure. So here's my final question for you, the question that I've been wrestling with myself. What do you do when the people you love betray you? Do you hold on to the betrayal forever? Do you forgive unconditionally? Or do you find some middle ground where you protect yourself while still remaining open to the possibility of reconciliation? I honestly don't know the answer. I'm still figuring it out. But I do know that I made the right choice in protecting my legacy, in ensuring that the land would go to someone I could trust. That part I'm certain about.